Hi everybody, it's Chris Kandar here. Welcome to the next edition of FAQ. Each weekday we look at a different part of the Bible to see how it helps us to live in this moment. And today, we're coming to one of my favourite parts of the Bible. I know it's wrong, isn't it, to have a favourite part of the Bible, a little bit like having a favourite child. That would be wrong too. Christians believe that all of this book is God-breathed and useful for teaching, rebuking and correcting and training in righteousness. But this passage just speaks to me right now, and it's been one of those passages that has just kept popping up in my head and called me to various different parts of the work that I'm in right now. You probably know I'm involved in a charity that's trying to find adoptive homes for children in foster care, and it feels really timely that there's a massive need for more foster carers right now because of lockdown and COVID. We're expecting a surge of kids to come into care once schools are opened again. It also is important that there is a racial disparity about kids in care. More BME children from black and minority ethnic backgrounds are represented in the care system than should be if it was purely based on population distribution. Children who are black wait longer to be adopted and actually find it harder to be adopted at all. This is totally out of order, and in all the conversation we're having about Black Lives Matter, and you probably know I'm really passionate about this, children, vulnerable children, children in care, that's not been part of the conversation right now, and it needs to be. It's something that our work at Home for Good has been involved in. We had a Downing Street reception in October last year, calling the government and calling the sector and calling society to play its role in fixing this racial disparity so that children who are black are not worse off than other children when it comes to the care system. So this matters, and maybe you'll guess which chapter of Esther we're in today. That is this kind of activate a part of the Bible. I don't know about you, but lockdown does strange things to us, doesn't it? It's the best of times and it's the worst of times. It's the best of times. I love having all my kids under one roof. I love having our meals together. I love the family time that we're getting. But it also feels like the beginning of a horse race. You know, they lock them into those little cages so that they're full of anger and rage and energy, and then they release them. So I'm just waiting for that release into action. So I'm ended up dreaming up crazy ideas of what we could start to do now in lockdown that will have an impact for vulnerable people. So anyway, lots of ideas, lots of kind of feelings that this is a moment. And I don't know if you're feeling that about the public imagination right now, what people are open to, what people are willing to consider. There seems to be a greater sense of kind of public solidarity. We're interested in our care workers and cheering them on. There's more political engagement than I've remembered for a long time. And there's also this sense that the world needs to change its story about racial reconciliation. So feels like this cultural moment is right for Christians to step forward. And I think this passage will help us. If you've been tracking with us, you'll know we're up to Esther chapter 4. And if you've missed any, have a look at FAQ with Chris Kandar on YouTube or on Instagram, and you can watch the other 3 episodes, because this book, you don't want to miss a chapter. It's so powerful. Esther chapter 4, verse 1. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Remember what's happened. There's been an edict from Haman the Agagite, and he's just declared that every Jewish person in the whole kingdom, the Medo-Persian kingdom, is going to be executed on one particular day. And Mordecai is a Jew, and he's outraged and incensed about this. And so he goes, puts on sackcloth and ashes. That's the classic dress of someone who is in mourning in the Bible. It was a kind of Jewish custom. You wore these dowdy clothes and you wore ashes on your body as a way of saying things are not right. Sometimes I feel like my lockdown beard is like that. It's like things are not right. But he has far more things to be upset about than I do. In fact, everyone throughout the empire, all the Jewish people are in mourning about this and wailing and fasting. Fasting is about as close as you get here in the book of Esther to prayer. There's not a lot of talk about God. There's not a lot of talk about spirituality. We're going to see why as we go through. But people fasted as a sign to God that they really cared about this thing, that they were saying to God, we're even willing to go without food and kind of, I suppose, hurt our bodies in some way in order to show you, God, that we're really serious about this. Now, if you get fasting wrong, fasting is like a spell. It's like a prayer booster. If you fast enough, then God will have to listen to your prayers. It's like in Harry Potter. My daughter's reading Harry Potter over and over and over and over. And if you just say the right spell in the right way, then stuff happens. But some people treat prayer like that if you can just fast or pray the right words in the right way, or have enough people praying, that God will have to do things. That isn't how prayer works, because prayer has no power in itself. Prayer is an ask to God. God is the powerful one, and he doesn't have to listen to your prayers because you've ganged up on him with a bunch of friends, or you've fasted. But it's just, I guess, fasting positively is a way we say to God that we are genuinely serious, and we're asking God to listen to our prayers. We're not bullying him or forcing him to do anything. Anyway, regardless, that's what's happening here. The nation of Israel is fearing it for its life. And so there's this great sense of outrage, and they're on the streets. They're not allowed in the inner circle because no one wearing sackcloth can do that, but they're on the streets praying, asking, demonstrating that things are wrong. Maybe you feel a kind of connection with our cultural moment. I've not seen anything like this in my lifetime. That one man's death in Minneapolis is impacting the rest of the world. People are chanting George Floyd's name in England, in Trafalgar Square, in Oxford, where I was earlier this week, in Belgium, in Australia. One man brought up on the wrong side of the tracks in Houston, his name is being chanted because he is like a symbol, an icon of the racial injustice that is happening to many, many people around the world. They're not saying around the world that it's only in America that we've got a problem with this. They're saying every nation has a problem with racial disparity, with injustice, oppression. And George Floyd is just the name that has triggered this global response. This feels like a moment. And the nation of Israel were going through a moment of their own in their day. Verse 4. When Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, assigned to her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. I guess they didn't have an easy way of getting news in the castle. Even though Esther's the queen of the kingdom, remember, she could be just this trophy wife like Xerxes wanted for Vashti to be. When he called her, she was supposed to come. So she probably wasn't brilliantly informed about what was going on. So she's got to send a eunuch to go and find out for Mordecai. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict of their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to urge her to go into the king's presence, to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Oh, just going to ignore that. Someone's phoning me in the middle of a recording. They don't know I'm recording, so just ignoring it. Hopefully you can't hear it ringing. So this is a bit of political lobbying, isn't it? That there is Mordecai in the king's gate. He can't go any closer because he's wearing sackcloth, but he's got this kind of one-man demonstration going on saying things are wrong. He's done his homework. He's found out the exact sum of money. He's got a copy of the letter. He's built his case, and he's offered it up to his person in the king's palace, who just happens to be his adopted daughter Esther, who's kept her Jewish background secret. you see how things are lining up perfectly for the story to unfold. It's like the chess pieces have been put in place. And now Mordecai says, now's the time. I told you not to speak up before. Keep silent because it wasn't the time. But now's the time. Go in. Plead for mercy for your people. I guess that's quite an important lesson, isn't it, about political engagement. Sometimes we are too quick to engage. We're always kind of shouting and always angry. But there's something about Mordecai that knew when to speak and when not to, when to stay silent and when not to, when to play positively with the government. He's done that in that he's spoken up, as we're going to hear again later, when there was a plot to assassinate the king. Even though it was a despotic king, he still spoke up. And we've seen that with Esther. She won favour with all the right people, but she doesn't want to play her political capital too early. There's a right moment, and Mordecai says, this is it. This is the moment. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned by the king has but one law, that he be put to death. The only exception to this is for the king to extend the gold scepter to him and spare his life. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. Esther's explaining to Mordecai how dangerous the mission he's asking her to go on is. And she's just kind of getting reassurance that this is the moment. This is it. You know, just to talk about being protected. The king won't even let anyone turn up unannounced because they will be killed. I don't know about you. I got my call just then. And sometimes you want protection from other people. There are ways in which you kind of build barriers so that people can't reach you. But this king, oh my goodness, his protection is so strong that if you dare to call him or come to him without an appointment, boom, you're dead. So Esther's just checking. You're asking me to take my life in my hands. The king hasn't wanted anything to do with me for 30 days. Maybe he's engaging with other women in the harem because we know he had all sorts of kind of problems with that side of his life. And so this is really dangerous. Are you sure? Are you sure you want me to go in? Verse 12. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to royal position for such a time as this. Oh man, for such a time as this. Got to come back to that in a minute. But this is interesting, isn't it? This is Mordecai saying, yep, this is it. This is the moment. Go and play your card. Come before the king. Don't think that you will be spared. This threat is so bad. Haman the Agagite is intent on eradicating the Jews. This is racially motivated extermination of a people. You'll be killed, destroyed, annihilated was the language that was used in the previous chapter. Don't think you will escape. You will be found out too. This really matters. And he mentioned that your father's family will die. Remember, Mordecai was the only relative that could take in Esther. He's her adopted dad. I said earlier I wasn't sure whether Mordecai was married or not. I think a woman would have got closer access to Esther than Mordecai would have been able to, because men weren't allowed into the harem, but women probably were. So I don't know. It's not definite, but for me, it's a signal that maybe Mordecai had adopted her as a single adopter. I'm happy to be proved wrong. Scholars out there, put me right. But he's saying your father's line will end because you will die. And for many Jewish people, that really mattered. You know, there was a mysterious, sometimes clear, sometimes not clear view about eternal life. And so for a lot of families, they thought that having children to carry on the family line was the way that you preserved and honoured the past. And Mordecai is saying, no, it could be the end of your family line if you don't go in, if you don't plead for your people. And he says, who knows if it's not for such a time as this that you were given this opportunity, for such a time as this. Friends, we're all living in a very different cultural moment to Esther. They faced the death and extermination of the entire Jewish nation. It's anti-Semitism off the chart. And that could have been the end. Interestingly, Mordecai doesn't think it's the end. He thinks help will arise from somewhere else, which is intriguing, isn't it? It's almost like he's so convinced that God is going to overrule that there will be another way out. This is not the end of the Jewish nation, but it could be pretty disastrous for Esther. I love it that there's this belief in the sovereignty of God, that he will do what's right. And yet there's still a need for courageous service from us. Some people think, oh, if God's sovereign, there's no human responsibility. We don't need to do anything. But Mordecai is so convinced that God is in control, and yet he still thinks there's a need for Esther to risk her life and take some responsibility. That's a really beautiful tension. I don't know where you land on the whole Arminian versus Calvinistic approach to predestination and all that kind of stuff. But this tension is held perfectly by Mordecai. That God's planned this, he's in control, he will bring help from otherwhere, but this is your moment, Esther. Step forward, walk into it. Friends, I wonder what you feel is your moment. What is it for such a time as this that you've been given the opportunities that you have, the voice you've been given, the learning you've been living, the network you've been given, the resources you've been given? What is it that you've been called to do? How have you been called to invest your life? For Esther, it was to speak up on behalf of the Jewish nation. For me, I'm feeling it's to do with speaking up for vulnerable children and calling the church to action and welcoming kids and showing them the love and mercy that they need, and that being part of the demonstration of the grace and mercy of God for a nation and a world that really needs that. But what is it for you? What's your calling? What is it that you're supposed to jump in with? Is it to continue on in your present job as is? Has God got a higher calling that he's asking you to do? Is he asking you to be brave or courageous? Is he asking you to speak to neighbours or friends? What is it? There's something so exciting when you're in step with God's vision and plan for your life. There's no place like it. It's like, I don't know, living in the slipstream of God's Spirit is beautiful. And I don't mean it's easy and it's happy all the time, but there's something invigorating and exciting about it. And if you're not quite sure what that is, let me encourage you. Maybe meditate on this passage. Maybe speak to some friends around you who can speak truth into your life and say, look, I see this in you. I call this out in you, a leadership gift, a courageous momentum that's on your life. I see that and I want to encourage it. I've been so grateful for friends in my life that have spurred me on and helped me. And I don't get it right most of the time, but sometimes that you feel like you're in the moment, in the place for such a time as this. What is Esther going to do? What will her response be to this moment? Her adopted dad, who has loved her and seen her flourish and grow and stuck with her even in these really difficult circumstances of being conscripted into the king's harem. He still speaks challenge into her life. And he still calls her into God's goodwill for her. And I love it. I love this relationship in the Bible. I love the heartbeat of it. And I love this book. And tomorrow we're going to find out what happens next. What will Esther do? What will God do, who hasn't even been name dropped so far in this book? But join me again tomorrow for the next exciting episode of FAQ.